Now, as earlier mentioned, we did say that the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere can also be dissolved in seawater, and even sometimes the lake water. When I talk about seawater, lake water, ocean water, and so on and so forth, I am looking at the volume of water, large volumes of water. It will dissolve a lot of carbon dioxide. Then we ask ourselves, what could be the significance of this dissolved carbon dioxide inside the water? Very easy. The carbon dioxide dissolved in water will finally be utilized by the aquatic animals, I mean the aquatic plants. The dissolved carbon dioxide is then utilized by the aquatic plants for photosynthesis. The aquatic plants will be able to utilize this. That means they will carry out photosynthesis. Aquatic plants are plants growing in water. So they will be able to use the carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. They will manufacture their own food. Then when they manufacture the food, they will be fed upon by the animals, the aquatic animals which are inside the water. So you can see that the carbon dioxide dissolved in water has been taken up by the plants. Then the plants have manufactured the food containing the carbon. Animals are feeding on this food with the carbon, then taking the carbon from the plants. You can see the pathway being taken by this carbon. Now, apart from photosynthesis in the water, some aquatic animals use this particular carbon dioxide to make their shells very hard. Some of them combine with calcium oxide or calcium hydroxide inside the water to form calcium carbonate that forms the shells. These shells protect the animals which are fragile from the invading predators. Now, once the plants manufacture their own food through photosynthesis, the animals will then obtain the food by eating the plants. And remember, these plants are the carriers. They contain the carbon that we are talking about. So plants got the carbon from carbon dioxide, have carried out photosynthesis, prepared the food containing the carbon, then the animals are feeding on this particular food which also has the carbon. Now, when finally these animals and plants die and rot away, they release some of this carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. The rotting process can involve so many things. One of them will be some of the gases will be released back to the atmosphere. Some of this can also be buried, where once they are buried, they slowly turn into what we call fossil fuel after several millions of years. Now, what we're saying is, when plants die, you cut down the trees, they become so big and you cut them down, and you don't do anything to them. You just leave them to lie fallow on the ground, flat on the surface, where the animals die and they're buried. With the time, after rotting, the skeleton normally does not completely get destroyed. It takes a very long time. So as more animals die and more plants die, those particular skeletons come together and they form layers which move deeper and deeper, forming what you call the fossil fuels. Now, the fossil fuels we're talking about in this case is fuel that comes from the dead materials, the dead animals or the dead plants. By this we are referring to coal. We have coal, C-O-L. We also have coke. You know, those are some of the fossil fuels that we can be able to use. They are as a result of the death of this. And these two contain carbon as the major element. They actually are made up of carbon. Now, when the tiny sea creatures die and their bodies fall to the bottom of the sea, they slowly change into limestone after a very long time, several millions of years afterwards. That means we have some sea creatures once they die, then their bodies decant to the bottom of the sea. When they go to the bottom of the sea, they slowly change into limestone. And limestone, remember in chemistry, is the common name for the chemical name calcium carbonate. That's calcium carbonate. And remember, calcium carbonate is very important in our chemistry lessons. But this does not happen just instantly. Now, the return of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere is when the plants and animals carry out respiration. Remember that when the plants and animals respire, the respiration process for the animals and the plants is the breakdown of the food, leading to the release of energy. For you to benefit from any food material, it must be broken down in the body. When you eat, immediately after the meal, you sweat, sometimes in the course of the meal. But mostly after the meal, then you start sweating. The sweating is because there is active breakdown of the food, giving out that energy that comes out. Some of it comes out in the form of heat. So the heat is being given out in the form of sweat. The underlying factor there is when the animals and plants body break down the food through respiration, they release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And this happens when they utilize oxygen. So you can see that after photosynthesis, food was made, animals fed on the food, then they are carrying out respiration. Plants are also breaking down the food. Remember that the plants also require energy. So they have to break down part of the food they have manufactured to release the energy. Then this particular carbon dioxide goes back to the atmosphere, where we still have the same plants. So they're releasing carbon dioxide, then absorbing it back again. That is what it means by the cycle. Now, respiration, as earlier stated, is the process which occurs when food is broken down in the body to release the energy for the body. That is what I've just talked about. That the plants and animals will break down the food in the body, releasing the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere, and of course with the energy they need. Now, when the plants and animals die, they decay and hence release the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. When they die, they release this carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. Remember that after death, they also have to rot. So in the course of the rotting process, the carbon dioxide will be given back. So we have the carbon dioxide coming from respiratory activities in the plant body and the animal body, as well as the decaying of the plants and animals after death. This carbon dioxide is given back to the atmosphere. And remember, we are talking about the carbon cycle. So when the carbon dioxide is given back to the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide is a major source of carbon, then practically what we are saying is that carbon is returned to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. That is exactly what we are saying. Fossilized plants and animals form what we call fossil fuels. As earlier stated, the coal, the oil, the coke, and the gas. And these ones will burn and then release carbon dioxide. Remember that these fossil fuels, fossil fuels are fuels made from the dead, decaying matter. The dead, decaying matter, whether it's from plants or animals. Those are the fossil fuels. After several years of decay, Then when they burn up, they also release a lot of energy given out. And that is the carbon dioxide released, then is taken back to the atmosphere. Again, being a source of the carbon that we require. Now, limestone, on the other hand, can also produce carbon dioxide when it is heated in the industries that use it as a source of heat energy. There are some specific industries that carry out chemical reactions that require release of a lot of heat or usage of a lot of heat. For example, in the extraction industries, metal extraction industries, where a lot of heat is required to keep the ore in molten state, limestone is a major component, because when it is broken down by the heat, then a lot of energy is given out, heat energy is given out. So, breaking down the calcium carbonate, remember limestone is the calcium carbonate, will release the carbon dioxide that is taken back to the atmosphere. Wood can also burn. Of course, this is the commonest type of fuel, and when it burns, it also releases the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and the story continues. So, basically, that is how the cycle of carbon occurs. It's taken up by the plants, manufactures food, animals feed on the food, gets the carbon, then when the animals and the plants die and decay, the carbon dioxide is given back to the atmosphere, and also the sea creatures forming the limestone, forming the shells, and so on and so forth. So basically, that is what encompasses, what contains, or what is contained in what we call the carbon cycle. So thank you very much for your session. Let's meet in our next discussions on chemistry.